After I was assaulted at a frat party, my brother drove me home. I tearfully told him what happened, hoping for comfort, but all he said was, "At least now you've learned your lesson." That's when I stopped crying, not because the pain disappeared, but because I knew in that moment I'd burned down every illusion they ever had about me. I felt a deep resentment towards every member of my family. Following my mother's passing, I assumed the role of the household's primary female figure, responsible for my 6 younger brothers. However, the situation was not as one might imagine. I was never subjected to worse treatment than them, nor did I feel compelled to dedicate my existence to their care, unlike characters such as Fiona from Shameless. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Despite their younger age, each of them aspired to be the head of the household, consistently making an effort to shield and look after me. If I was out late or failed to return home by 11 o'clock, they would argue amongst themselves, each eager to be the one to drive me back. They even purchased feminine hygiene products for me when needed and ensured my makeup supplies were replenished. It truly felt as though I had a personal team of protectors. So one particular day at a fraternity gathering with my companions, I dressed exactly as I pleased, completely unconcerned. I wore torn denim and a midriff-bearing top. This was my first significant party since reaching the age of 21. I consumed 2 shots of tequila. I might have had more, but I wished to remain in control. Furthermore, my friends were already behaving quite wildly. Yet, as I moved to the rhythm of Rihanna's Disturbia, I sensed a man approach from behind, drawing my waist against his hips. I had no desire to even glance at him, as he carried the scent of cannabis and alcohol, which was repulsive. But before I could manage to push him away, I felt myself being helplessly pulled into a dim, unoccupied room. Panic surged through my body as I heard the door click shut behind me. When I turned to face him, the light from the window illuminated his features. My blood ran cold. I had encountered him previously in my classes, at places I ate, on the bus ride home. This was the very individual my friends had assured me was not pursuing me. The subsequent 10 minutes were the most terrifying of my existence. His gaze was fixed on mine. I found myself unable to move any part of my body. I couldn't even utter a sound. Once he was finished, he simply withdrew and departed. I rolled onto my side and messaged my brother to come and collect me. Tears streamed down my face. None of my friends seemed to have noticed my absence. When my brother arrived, I rushed into the car, completely broke down, and revealed the truth. I knew as soon as you left the house in that attire, something unfavorable would occur. But, at least now you've learned your lesson. Through my tears, I simply stared at him, hoping this was some strange form of male humor. But he merely continued driving, acting as though I had just informed him of a romantic rejection. My spirit shattered. I checked my phone, and still, none of my friends had realized I was gone. Upon reaching home, my sole desire was to retreat to my room and weep beneath my covers. And that is precisely what I did until my brother began recounting the incident to our other brothers. Immediately, a discussion erupted concerning how much I deserved what happened. Soon, one brother even interjected, stating, "I feel like if I were in your position, I would simply choose to interpret it as a compliment." Another chuckled and remarked, "The universe was just imparting modesty to her the hard way. Better late than never." Then they all burst into laughter, as if it were the most amusing thing they had ever heard. At this point, my face throbbed from the intensity of my crying. But then I ceased. Not because I wasn't distressed. I absolutely was. It was among the most agonizing moments of my life. Yet, amidst all the suffering, a realization dawned on me. My family believed they understood me, but they were about to discover otherwise. Because I am not the type of woman who crumbles when challenged. I am the kind who demonstrates to others not to underestimate her. The next morning arrived sooner than I wished. My eyes remained swollen and reddened, but something within me had fundamentally changed. While my brothers consumed breakfast downstairs, jesting about a video game, I sat at my desk with my laptop open. My fingers moved across the keyboard with determination as I investigated every detail I could find regarding sexual assault laws in our state, campus reporting protocols, legal entitlements, and evidence collection timelines. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, but I compelled myself to absorb every particular. Time was of the essence. Evidence deteriorates, memories fade, but most crucially, I needed to act before my brother's interpretation of events became the accepted narrative within our household. I retrieved my phone and began documenting everything while the specifics were still vivid. The time I departed for the party, my attire, the amount I drank, the precise sequence of occurrences. My assailant's face was seared into my memory, along with every location I had previously seen him. My friends had dismissed my concerns about him following me, but now I comprehended the pattern. He had been observing me, learning my routines, awaiting the opportune moment. My phone's camera captured the contusions on my wrists where he had restrained me, the torn seam on my jeans, every physical mark that substantiated the reality of what happened to me, despite my brother's desired beliefs. I transcribed their exact remarks from the previous night, each cruel jest and dismissive comment. If they wished to diminish my trauma, I would ensure there was a record of their callousness. Downstairs, I heard my brothers preparing for their day. They proceeded through their morning routines as if nothing had transpired, as if their sister had not been violated, as if they had not spent the preceding night laughing about it. The casual normalcy of their conduct made my stomach churn. I waited until they had all departed before taking action. The campus counseling center commenced operations at 8 in the morning, and I intended to be their first appointment. But first, I needed to visit the health center. The online resources clearly indicated that physical evidence was time-sensitive. Each hour that elapsed meant potentially losing vital proof. The drive to campus felt distinct this time. Every male student I encountered caused my skin to crawl. How many of them thought like my brothers? How many would hold me accountable for what occurred? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I now possessed a strategy, and I would not permit fear to derail it. The health center waiting area was nearly deserted at this early hour. When I explained my reason for being there, the receptionist's demeanor immediately shifted from routine politeness to gentle concern. She provided me with forms to complete and assured me that someone would attend to me promptly. The examination was thorough and methodical. The nurse practitioner elucidated each step, every sample gathered, every photograph taken. She was compassionate yet professional, treating my body as a crime scene that required proper documentation. When she concluded, she sat opposite me with a folder of resources. "I understand this is overwhelming," she stated softly, "but you are doing everything correctly. This evidence will be crucial if you choose to pursue legal action." The phrase lingered in the air between us. She outlined my choices: filing a police report, pursuing a Title IX complaint through the university, or both. She also mentioned something that sent shivers down my spine. "We have had other students report similar experiences with someone matching your description of the perpetrator. Regrettably, those cases were dismissed due to insufficient evidence and a lack of familial support. Other students, he had done this before." My friend's dismissal of my worries suddenly made horrifying sense. How many other women had they persuaded to disregard their instincts? After the health center, I proceeded to the counseling office. The counselor, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Martinez, listened without judgment as I recounted everything, not only the assault, but also my brother's reaction. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as I described their victim-blaming and derision. "What you are experiencing from your family is unfortunately common," she remarked. "But that does not make it acceptable. You deserve support, not condemnation." She elaborated on the Title IX process, how the university would investigate, the protections I would have as a complainant, and the required standard of evidence. It was daunting, but she guaranteed that I would not have to navigate it alone. "The most important thing to comprehend," Dr. Martinez stated, "is that seeking justice is not solely about punishing your assailant. It is about reclaiming your agency and potentially safeguarding other students." Other students. The phrase echoed in my mind as I departed her office with a stack of brochures and forms. How many others had endured in silence because their families had failed them as mine had. When I arrived home that afternoon, my brothers were already present. They barely glanced up from their video games as I traversed the living room. The youngest, barely 16, made a jest about me finally emerging from slumber. The others laughed. I went directly to my room and continued my investigation. The campus police held jurisdiction over offenses that occurred at university events. I could submit a report to them and initiate a formal inquiry, but I needed to be prepared for the subsequent developments. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was strained. My brothers conversed among themselves, deliberately excluding me from their discussion. Finally, The eldest broke the quiet. You're not seriously considering turning this into a major issue, are you? He did not even look at me as he spoke. What happened was regrettable, but involving the police will only worsen everything. Consider our family's standing. Our family's standing. As if that held more importance than fairness. As if their comfort was more significant than my trauma. I did not respond, simply continuing to eat in silence. But my silence seemed to provoke them more than any argument would have. They exchanged glances, communicating in that unspoken manner siblings do. Finally, another brother spoke up. Look, we're just trying to protect you. You don't want to be known as the girl who fabricated an assault. These matters follow you indefinitely. The girl who fabricated an assault, as if I were inventing it. As if the contusions on my body and the evidence collected at the health center were products of my imagination. I rose from the table, my appetite gone. Where are you going? The eldest demanded. To do schoolwork, I lied. In reality, I was going to complete the police report forms. My hands trembled as I detailed every event, but my handwriting remained steady. I had mentally rehearsed this statement so many times that the words flowed effortlessly onto the page. The following few days established a pattern. During the day, I attended classes and met with various support services on campus. The Title IX coordinator, the victim advocate, the detective assigned to my case. Each meeting added another layer to my expanding case file. But at home, the psychological conflict intensified. My brother's initial dismissal evolved into active animosity. They would make snide remarks about attention-seeking behavior and victim complexes. They would loudly discuss how some women regretted consensual encounters and attempted to alter history. The psychological warfare at home reached new heights when I discovered my brothers had been monitoring my computer activity. They had installed tracking software while I was on campus, perusing every email I had sent to counselors and support services. The invasion of privacy felt like yet another assault, this time by the individuals who were supposed to shield me. My aunt telephoned unexpectedly one evening, concerned about rumors she had overheard from neighbors. My brothers had been disseminating stories about my mental breakdown throughout our close-knit community. They had painted a picture of an unstable young woman making wild accusations for attention. The preemptive character assassination was calculated and cruel. I packed a bag that night while my brothers slept. The choice to depart was not simple, but remaining meant being submerged in their toxicity. My aunt resided across town in a modest apartment, but she welcomed me without hesitation. For the first time since the assault, I could breathe without feeling stifled by judgment. The relocation provoked an explosive reaction from my brothers. They appeared at my aunt's building the next morning, pounding on her door and demanding my return home. My aunt stood firm, refusing them entry. They shouted through the door about familial loyalty and how I was demolishing everything our mother had built. The irony was not lost on me. They invoked our deceased mother while defending their cruelty. Campus security increased patrols after I reported seeing my assailant near my classes. He had grown more audacious, no longer concealing his presence. He would sit in the campus coffee shop when he knew I studied there. He would appear at the library during my usual hours. The pursuit was now overt, as if he knew my family would not support me. The detective assigned to my case disclosed unsettling information during our next meeting. My attacker originated from a wealthy local family with deep connections to the university. His father served on the board of trustees. His mother donated substantial sums to various campus initiatives. The institutional pressure to suppress this matter was already escalating. My brothers intensified their campaign by contacting my professors. They conveyed apprehension about my mental state and suggested I might be fabricating stories for sympathy. One professor drew me aside after class, awkwardly mentioning the calls. The humiliation burned, but I maintained my composure and clarified the situation. Some professors believed me. Others suddenly became distant. The financial manipulation commenced subtly. My brothers controlled access to our mother's life insurance payout, which was intended to support all of us through college. They had been providing me with a monthly allowance, but abruptly the transfers ceased. When I inquired, they asserted they needed to reassess given my instability. The message was unmistakable: comply or face destitution. My part-time employment at the campus bookstore became my lifeline. I took on additional shifts, grateful for the diversion and the earnings. My colleagues observed the changes in me. The way I recoiled when male customers approached too closely. How I consistently positioned myself near exits. They did not intrude, but their quiet assistance meant everything. The Title IX investigation encountered its first significant hurdle when the university asserted they could not proceed without additional witnesses. The darkened room where the assault occurred had no cameras. My attacker's friends provided alibis, claiming he had been with them throughout the evening. The investigator's apologetic tone foreshadowed the outcome before she even finished explaining. Other victims began contacting me privately. A girl from my economics class discreetly passed me a note with her phone number. A senior approached me in the library restroom, first verifying we were alone. They all recounted similar experiences: the pursuit, the isolation at gatherings, the assault. None had reported it. Their families had threatened, bribed, or shamed them into silence. My brother's harassment extended to my aunt. They contacted her employer, implying she was harboring a troubled niece who might pose a danger. They left malicious messages on her voicemail, accusing her of enabling my delusions. My aunt, a social worker who comprehended abuse dynamics, documented everything and filed her own police report for harassment. The breakthrough originated from an unforeseen source. My attacker had assaulted a professor's daughter the previous year. The professor, Dr. Chun, had been quietly building a case, gathering testimonies from victims who had been too fearful to come forward officially. She reached out through Dr. Martinez, offering to share what she had collected. Dr. Chen's files depicted a horrifying pattern. My attacker had been operating for at least 3 years, targeting women from difficult family circumstances. He meticulously researched his victims, selecting those whose families were likely to blame them rather than offer support. The predatory calculation made me physically ill. My brothers attempted a new strategy: emotional manipulation. The youngest appeared at my aunt's apartment alone, tears in his eyes. He pleaded with me to return home, claiming the others were being too harsh, but that he believed me. I desperately wished to trust him. But when he suggested I could come back if I simply abandoned all this legal action, I recognized it as another deceptive tactic. The detective informed me that my attacker's family had retained a prestigious law firm. They were preparing to argue that any encounter was consensual and that I was retaliating for being rejected. The victim-blaming strategy was predictable, yet no less painful. They would portray me as a desperate girl who had thrown herself at their son. My support network on campus grew stronger. Other survivors formed an informal group, convening weekly in Dr. Martinez's office. We exchanged strategies for managing familial rejection, institutional resistance, and the daily trauma of seeing our assailants at liberty. The solidarity helped counter the isolation my brothers had attempted to create. The financial pressure intensified when my brothers discovered I had been accessing our mother's medical records. They threatened legal action, asserting I had no right to those documents. But I had uncovered inconsistencies in the reports surrounding her death, contusions dismissed as accidental, a pattern of emergency room visits in her final months. The components of a darker mystery were emerging. My aunt disclosed something that altered everything. She had suspected for years that my mother's death was not natural. Our mother had confided in her about domestic violence, but consistently refused to elaborate or accept assistance. My aunt possessed photographs of bruises my mother had shown her, evidence that had haunted her since the funeral. The revelation recontextualized my brother's conduct. They had not simply become cruel after our mother's death. They had absorbed these patterns from somewhere. The protective facade they had maintained had been precisely that, a performance that crumbled the moment I required genuine support. I extended my documentation to include our family history, hospital records, police reports that had been filed and mysteriously abandoned, concerned calls from teachers that led nowhere. A pattern of aggression and concealment emerged, with my brothers serving as both observers and participants in a cycle of abuse. The campus investigation took an unforeseen turn when security footage from the fraternity house parking lot depicted my attacker carrying an unconscious woman to his vehicle 2 hours after he had assaulted me. She was discovered the next morning in her dormitory room with no recollection of how she arrived there. The pattern was escalating. My brother's reaction to this new evidence was telling. Instead of reconsidering their stance, they became even more entrenched. They suggested the other woman was also fabricating, that this was some sort of conspiracy against an upstanding family. Their commitment to shielding my attacker over their own sister revealed their true priorities. The detective proposed I consider a restraining order against my brothers. Their harassment had escalated to appearing at my workplace, following my aunt, and spreading increasingly malicious rumors. The legal protection would be limited, but might deter the worst of their behavior. Filing for the restraining order meant confronting my brothers in court. They arrived in their finest attire, playing the role of concerned siblings. They testified about my history of mental illness, a complete fabrication, and suggested I had been unstable since our mother's death. The judge saw through their charade, granting the order. The financial investigation into our mother's estate uncovered more disturbing facts. My brothers had been diverting funds intended for my education into their own accounts. They had forged my signature on documents, claimed non-existent expenses, and concealed assets that should have been equally distributed. The theft amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. My attacker made an error that would prove pivotal. He approached one of his victims while she was wearing a wire for an unrelated campus journalism project. His threats were captured with perfect clarity, admitting to the assaults while cautioning her to remain silent. The recording was admissible evidence, a breakthrough in the case. The university suddenly became more cooperative when confronted with concrete evidence and the possibility of a lawsuit. They reopened the Title IX investigation, this time with a different investigator who appeared genuinely interested in uncovering the truth rather than safeguarding the institution's reputation. My brother's final attempt at control came through extended family. Cousins, uncles, and aunts I had not heard from in years suddenly reached out, all with the same message. I was ruining the family, dishonoring our mother's memory, and needed to cease this madness. The coordinated campaign revealed the depth of the dysfunction, but something had shifted within me. Each attack made me more resilient, more resolute. I was no longer merely fighting for justice for myself. I was fighting for all the women he had harmed, for future victims who might be spared, and for the truth about my family that had been suppressed for too long. The prosecutor assigned to the criminal case was young, but formidable. She had handled similar cases and understood the dynamics of familial betrayal and institutional resistance. She cautioned me that the trial would be brutal, that my attacker's lawyers would scrutinize every aspect of my life, but she also pledged to fight just as vigorously. My brother's reaction to the criminal charges was expected. They offered to mediate between me and my attacker's family, proposing some form of financial settlement that would make everything disappear. The fact that they had been in communication with his family all along was no longer surprising, merely another betrayal to add to the list. The trial date was set. The university implemented temporary measures to keep my attacker away from me on campus. Other victims agreed to testify, their bravery bolstered by our increasing numbers. The case that had begun as my word against his was becoming something larger, something that could not be easily dismissed. My brothers made one last desperate attempt to regain authority. They filed for conservatorship, asserting I was mentally incapacitated and required their legal guidance. The audacity of utilizing the legal system they had tried to prevent me from accessing was astonishing. Their lawyer argued that my delusions about our mother's death proved I was incapable of making rational decisions. The conservatorship hearing became a pivotal moment. My lawyer presented evidence of their financial misdeeds, their harassment, and their efforts to obstruct justice. The judge not only rejected their petition, but referred the matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges against them. As the trial drew near, I moved forward with a peculiar blend of apprehension and resolve. My support system had expanded from nothing to include my aunt, fellow survivors, dedicated professionals, and even some community members who had finally seen through my brother's falsehoods. The girl who had been violated and ridiculed had transformed into a woman who refused to be silenced. The investigation into my mother's death officially recommenced when the medical examiner consented to review the case. My brother's panic was palpable. They hired their own legal representation, no longer united in their cruelty, but turning on each other as the pressure mounted. The family they had claimed to protect was self-destructing through its own corruption. On the eve of the trial, I sat in my aunt's modest living room, surrounded by evidence files and legal documents. The journey from that night at the fraternity party to this moment had been arduous, but I had learned something my brothers never grasped. True strength is not about control or intimidation. It is about upholding truth, even when everyone you care for turns against you. Tomorrow would mark the commencement of the next phase of this struggle. My attacker would face accountability, but so would the system that enabled him. And perhaps finally, the truth about my family would come to light. The girl they had sought to break had become their reckoning. The morning of the trial arrived with an unsettling blend of apprehension and resolve coursing through my veins. My aunt prepared breakfast while I reviewed my testimony notes one final time. The courthouse loomed ahead, a concrete symbol of justice that would at last hear the truth about what had transpired. My brothers arrived separately, each accompanied by their own legal counsel. The united front they had maintained for months had disintegrated under the weight of their own offenses. The eldest avoided eye contact as we passed in the corridor. The youngest appeared pale and frightened, finally comprehending the repercussions of their choices. The courtroom quickly filled. Dr. Chen sat in the gallery with several other women who had agreed to testify. Their presence fortified me. My attacker entered with his parents and legal team. His confident smirk suggested he still believed his family's wealth would shield him. Opening statements presented two starkly different portrayals. The prosecution outlined a pattern of predatory conduct, systematic targeting of vulnerable women, and institutional failures that facilitated a serial predator. The defense depicted me as a scorned woman seeking retribution, citing my family's dysfunction as proof of my instability. My testimony spanned hours. I recounted every moment of that night, every instance of pursuit that preceded it, every attempt to seek assistance that was dismissed. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, delving into my family situation, my brother's assertions about my mental state, and my mother's demise. But I had prepared for this. Every question designed to shatter me only reinforced my determination. The other victims' testimonies established an undeniable pattern. Each woman described similar tactics: the pursuit, the isolation, the calculated assault. The defense struggled to account for multiple independent narratives that aligned so precisely. The recording of my attacker's threats played in the silent courtroom, his own words condemning him. My brothers were summoned as witnesses, but their testimony backfired spectacularly. Under oath, their accounts contradicted each other. The prosecutor exposed their financial misdeeds, their campaign of harassment, and their communication with my attacker's family. What was intended to discredit me instead revealed the extent of their betrayal. The medical evidence was presented with clinical precision. The prosecutor guided the jury through each piece of physical evidence, each photograph, each medical finding that corroborated my account. The defense's narrative of consent crumbled under the weight of scientific proof. During a recess, I encountered my attacker's mother in the restroom. She began to speak, perhaps to threaten or negotiate, but I simply washed my hands and departed. There was nothing she could utter that would alter what her son had done or what was about to transpire. The trial continued for days. Each session unveiled more about the systems that had failed so many women. The university's Title IX coordinator admitted under oath that donor relationships had influenced their investigation process. Campus security acknowledged they had been instructed to minimize reports involving certain families. My aunt testified about the harassment she had endured from my brothers, presenting documentation of their threats and the damage to her reputation they had attempted. Her professional assessment of our family dynamics, delivered with clinical detachment, painted a picture of generational dysfunction that provided context for everything. The financial forensics expert detailed my brother's theft from our mother's estate. The jury observed forged documents, concealed accounts, and a systematic scheme to deprive me of my inheritance while maintaining control through financial dependence. The prosecutor connected this to their attempts to silence me about the assault. Dr. Martinez testified about the psychological impact of familial betrayal on assault survivors. She explained how my brother's response represented a secondary trauma that often prevented victims from seeking justice. Her testimony reframed their behavior from mere cruelty to active enablement of a predator. The defense's case relied heavily on character assassination. They brought in individuals who barely knew me to testify about my reputation and stability. But each witness crumbled under cross-examination, admitting they were basing their testimony on rumors disseminated by my brothers rather than personal knowledge. When my attacker took the stand, his arrogance proved to be his undoing. He contradicted himself multiple times, claimed not to recall key details, and displayed flashes of anger when challenged. His admission that he had researched my family situation before the party substantiated the prosecution's premeditation theory. The jury deliberated for less than a day. As we awaited the verdict, I sat with my aunt and the other survivors who had become my chosen family. Regardless of the outcome, we had spoken our truth. The system that had protected him for years had finally been compelled to listen. Guilty on all counts. The words resonated through the courtroom as my attacker's mother sobbed, and his father's face turned purple with fury. But I felt no gratification, only a hollow sense of relief that this phase was concluded. Justice had been served, but it could not undo what had been done. The sentencing hearing brought another wave of testimony. Victim impact statements revealed the true cost of his offenses. Women who had withdrawn from school, altered their majors, relocated away from families who had blamed them. I spoke about losing my brothers, my home, my sense of security in the world. He received 15 years with the possibility of parole in 7. His family's influence could no longer shield him from repercussions. As court officers escorted him away, he glanced back at me with unadulterated hatred. I met his gaze steadily. He held no power over me now. The investigation into my mother's death advanced slowly but steadily. The medical examiner's revised report suggested suspicious circumstances necessitating further inquiry. My brothers, facing their own legal difficulties, turned on each other, each attempting to minimize their role in concealing years of domestic violence. One by one, my brothers accepted plea agreements for the financial crimes. The theft, fraud, and conspiracy charges would keep them entangled in the legal system for years. The family residence had to be sold to satisfy restitution. The life insurance funds they had stolen were recovered and rightfully distributed. The youngest brother reached out through his lawyer, wishing to apologize and potentially reconcile. I declined. Some connections, once severed, could not be restored. He had chosen his allegiance when I needed him most. His regret now that consequences had arrived meant nothing. My aunt and I found a larger apartment together, combining our resources to establish a stable home. She had stood by me when biological family failed, demonstrating that chosen family could possess greater strength than blood relations. We prepared meals together, watched films, and gradually learned to feel secure once more. The university faced its own reckoning. The Title IX investigation uncovered systematic failures that led to policy revisions and staff replacements. Dr. Chen spearheaded a task force on improving assault response protocols. Genuine transformation occurred slowly, but it did occur. Other families reached out, sharing their own narratives of dysfunction and concealment. My case had opened avenues for discussions that had been suppressed for generations. The community's facade of a perfect family fractured, revealing the violence and silence beneath. I returned to my studies, changing my major to social work. My experiences, painful as they were, had revealed my true calling. I wished to assist other survivors in navigating systems that seemed designed to break them. Dr. Martinez became my mentor, guiding me towards a future I had never envisioned. The scholarship fund I established with the settlement money aided 3 women in continuing their education that first year. Witnessing their graduation, knowing they might have dropped out without support, gave meaning to everything I had endured. Their triumph was the ultimate vindication against those who had attempted to silence us. My brothers completed their sentences at different times. 2 departed the state immediately upon release. 1 struggled with addiction. The youngest repeatedly attempted to contact me through various channels. I maintained my boundaries, understanding that forgiveness did not necessitate a renewed relationship. The man who assaulted me served 5 years before his first parole hearing. I attended along with several other survivors to oppose his release. The board denied parole, citing his lack of genuine remorse and the severity of his offenses. He would serve at least 2 more years before another hearing. My advocacy work expanded beyond individual support. I spoke at conferences about familial betrayal and institutional failures in assault cases. Each speaking engagement terrified me, but survivors would approach afterward, grateful to hear their experiences validated. The final legal matter was my mother's case. After exhaustive investigation, prosecutors concluded there was insufficient evidence to bring murder charges. But the investigation's findings were made public, revealing years of documented abuse that authorities had disregarded. Her death might not bring criminal justice, but her truth was finally acknowledged. Years passed. I completed my degree, commenced my career, and built a life surrounded by individuals who truly protected and supported me. The trauma never entirely vanished, but it no longer defined me. I had transformed suffering into purpose, isolation into community, betrayal into boundaries. On the 5th anniversary of the assault, I stood in my office at the crisis center I now directed. Photographs on my desk depicted graduations, weddings, celebrations, survivors who had reclaimed their lives. The girl who had wept alone that night had become a woman who ensured no one else would face their trauma without assistance. My phone rang with another crisis call. I took a breath, composed myself, and answered. This work was demanding, triggering, exhausting, but every survivor who found their voice, every family dysfunction exposed, every system compelled to change made it worthwhile. I had learned that fairness was not solely about punishment. It was about disrupting cycles, speaking truth, and constructing something superior from the remnants of what was destroyed. The sun descended outside my office window as I concluded the call, connecting the young woman with resources and support. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, new survivors seeking aid, new systems to navigate. But tonight, I drove home to the family I had chosen, the life I had constructed, and the tranquility I had earned by refusing to be silenced. My narrative had commenced with treachery from those who should have protected me. It continued through legal conflicts, familial disintegration, and systemic shortcomings. But it did not conclude there. It evolved into something more, a testament that survival was attainable, that fairness could prevail, and that sometimes the families we select are more robust than those into which we are born. The girl they had sought to break had not only endured but flourished, transforming personal anguish into collective healing. That was the ultimate triumph.